The courtroom buzzed faintly with the quiet shuffling of papers, hushed whispers, and the distant clack of polished shoes against linoleum. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning at the Jefferson County Courthouse. But what was about to unfold was anything but ordinary. Seated alone at the defendant's table was a young black teenager, barely 16, lean-framed, with an oversized suit that hung from his shoulders like borrowed armor. His sneakers, though scuffed and faded, were laced with neat precision. His expression remained unreadable, part defiant, part frightened, part something else, something watchful, calculating. The judge, Honorable Gerald Whitmore, was a man of reputation, stern, traditional, and known to make examples out of youth who crossed legal lines. His robe swept around him like a cloak of power, and his gavel was more than wood. It was authority incarnate. He raised a brow as he glanced at the docket. "Name?" he asked flatly. "Jeremiah Wade, sir," the boy replied, voice steady. Whitmore leaned forward, peering down with mild annoyance. "And where is your legal counsel, Mr. Wade?" Jeremiah didn't flinch. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The courtroom chuckled. A few people stifled their laughter. Others didn't bother. The bailiff looked confused. A public defender in the back snorted. Judge Whitmore didn't laugh. He just blinked once, slowly, before adjusting his glasses. "This isn't traffic court," he said sharply. "You're being charged with felony trespassing and obstruction of justice. Serious crimes. Juvenile or not, this is not the kind of proceeding a high schooler should attempt to navigate alone." Jeremiah met the judge's gaze. "With respect, Your Honor, I have waived my right to counsel. Article 6, Section 1 of the State Juvenile Code provides that in non-capital cases, a competent minor may act as their own legal representative, provided the court finds them capable." Whitmore frowned, momentarily thrown off. He opened a folder, scanned a few pages, and sighed. "Competent," he muttered. "We'll see." The courtroom quieted as the first witness was called. A police officer, white, middle-aged, with a body cam clipped to his vest, approached the stand. He described finding Jeremiah in an abandoned building late at night, rummaging through what appeared to be sealed boxes. When approached, the boy allegedly ran. When caught, he claimed he was investigating a lead. Jeremiah rose and approached the stand. No attorney, no notes, just a folded piece of paper he barely glanced at. "Officer Claremont," he began, "you testified you found me in an abandoned building." "That's correct." "Did the building have signage prohibiting entry?" "It was boarded up. Obvious it was condemned. But no sign? No visible, no trespassing notice?" Claremont shifted. "Not at the time, no." "Thank you. Second, when you apprehended me, did you identify yourself as law enforcement before you restrained me?" "I was in uniform." "That's not what I asked." A pause. "No, I didn't verbally identify myself," Claremont admitted. "And your body cam, did you activate it prior to approaching me?" There was a longer pause. "No." Jeremiah nodded and turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I submit that the evidence obtained in that encounter is inadmissible under Section 13 of the State Juvenile Due Process Act." The officer failed to announce himself or activate recording, violating both state procedure and my Fourth Amendment rights. A hush settled. Whitmore blinked again. He turned to the court clerk, then to the doc, who was clearly scrambling through papers. "Is this accurate?" the judge asked sharply. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Your Honor, I believe. The body cam policy is discretionary, not mandatory." Jeremiah spoke again. "May I submit precedent, Your Honor?" Whitmore leaned back, intrigued despite himself. "Proceed." Jeremiah approached with a neatly printed case file. State v. Delgado, 2018. Dismissed on grounds of unconstitutional search and seizure under similar circumstances. Body cam was not activated. Evidence suppressed. That's 3rd District Court, binding jurisdiction. The judge flipped through the pages, reading in silence. For a moment, nothing moved. Then he looked up. "Motion to suppress evidence is granted." A ripple spread through the room. Whitmore stared at the boy now, not as a nuisance, not as another delinquent in the system, but with a different weight. He narrowed his eyes, Where did you learn to file a motion like that? Jeremiah didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just answered with quiet dignity. My mother taught me, sir. She was studying for the bar before she passed. Whitmore didn't respond. Something flickered in his eyes, but he pushed it down. The judge moved to pivot, trying to introduce new testimony. An eyewitness who allegedly saw Jeremiah near the building earlier in the day. But Jeremiah counted again. Objection, Your Honor. Witness not disclosed in pretrial filings. Violates procedural discovery requirements. Objection sustained, said the judge, with a flicker of emotion he couldn't quite conceal. He looked at the prosecutor now with something close to annoyance. By the end of the third hour, the so-called open and shut case had unraveled entirely. The judge called a brief recess, and as people filtered out for a moment, murmurs filled the halls. Who is this kid? Did you see him quote case law like that? He's not just smart, he's dangerous. But inside the bathroom, where Jeremiah splashed water on his face, there was no pride, no triumph, only a quiet weight pressing down on his chest. He'd won a small battle, sure, but he knew how courts worked. And more than that, he knew how the world worked for boys like him. Black, young, alone. In courtrooms like these, intelligence could be a threat. Dignity could be mistaken for defiance. Knowledge? Dangerous. Outside, the judge watched the boy return to his seat. Something in Whitmore's mind had shifted. He had mocked the boy at first, thought him foolish for trying to play grown-up in a courtroom built to crush even seasoned adults. But this wasn't theater. Jeremiah Wade wasn't trying to act like an attorney. He was one. And the judge, for the first time in a long while, found himself afraid of what it might mean if a system like his was no longer immune to boys like Jeremiah. Boys who knew the rules better than the rule makers. Boys who could outmaneuver injustice armed with nothing but books, memory, and the ghost of a mother who once believed she could change the world and pass that fire to her son. The recess ended sooner than Jeremiah expected. Perhaps the judge didn't like being made to wait. Or maybe, deep down, he didn't want the quiet to stretch too long. Quiet was dangerous when a courtroom began doubting the system it relied on. Jeremiah returned to his seat with the same steady posture, his hands folded carefully in front of him, not clenched, not fidgeting, calm, measured, his back straight. He had learned long ago that posture mattered, especially when you're young, especially when you're black, especially when you're alone. The world didn't listen to emotion from people like him. It only listened when you made emotion look like evidence. Judge Whitmore called the room to order. His gavel struck wood with less force now. It sounded more thoughtful, more hesitant, like a man tapping a table while lost in thought. "We'll resume," he said, his voice deeper than before, like it had dropped into a lower register out of respect. The prosecution brought in a new argument, an attempt to paint Jeremiah as a repeat offender. He was known, they said, to loiter near old buildings, asked too many questions at city record offices, and once even snuck into a university library where he wasn't allowed. Jeremiah rose slowly, walked to the center of the room, and tilted his head. "Are you suggesting that accessing public libraries and city records is now criminal behavior, Your Honor?" The prosecutor interjected. "We're suggesting it's suspicious. Why would a minor without legal representation be researching property deeds and legal case files?" Jeremiah turned to the jury box, not to the prosecutor, not even to the judge, but to the people watching. His voice softened, and it was no longer technical. It was human. "My mother always said that knowledge was armor," he began. "After she passed, I needed something, anything, to make sense of what was happening around me. Why my neighborhood kept getting torn apart. Why my school lost funding, but the jail across town got a new wing. Why my cousin got arrested just for being in the wrong place, wearing the wrong hoodie. So yeah, I started reading. Law books, property laws, court records. Because if this system was going to come after me and my people, I wanted to know exactly how it worked." Silence. Utter silence. The jury was frozen. The judge leaned back slightly. The prosecutor looked down, as if he'd bitten into something bitter and regretted it. Jeremiah continued, "Is that what we're calling suspicious now? A black kid trying to learn? The judge didn't stop him. He could have. He didn't. But the courtroom tension snapped when the prosecutor said, regardless of his educational habits, the fact remains, he trespassed, fled arrest, and tampered with a sealed site. Jeremiah's tone sharpened. The site wasn't sealed. That's the point. It was closed, not condemned. And the reason I was there was because I found inconsistencies in the city's records about who actually owned the building. Turns out, Your Honor, the structure had been marked for demolition, but the ownership transfer had never been finalized. The city sold it illegally. Judge Whitmore sat up straighter. That's a serious claim. I can prove it. Jeremiah handed over a stack of documents, copies of deeds, sale agreements, annotated timelines. He traced everything back himself. Signatures that didn't match. Clerical filings submitted too early. Redacted names that were never supposed to be redacted. The judge sifted through the papers, now visibly unsettled. The Dow flipped through his own copy with confusion and frustration. Jeremiah pressed on. This wasn't a simple trespass. This was me trying to uncover the truth behind why a building that used to be a community shelter was suddenly auctioned off in silence. And when I started asking questions, that's when I ended up here. The tension had shifted, not just in the room, but in the story itself. The court had wanted to make Jeremiah a cautionary tale, a bright boy who crossed a line. But now, it looked like the line had crossed him, and the courtroom knew it. Still, there was one voice that hadn't spoken yet. The judge. Whitmore placed the papers down. He folded his hands over them, looked at the boy not with the impatience of a gavel wielder, but with the complex weight of a man forced to re-examine his own assumptions. You understand, he said slowly, that even if the sale was questionable, entering a restricted building and running from officers is still a legal offense. I understand that, sir. I'm not here to argue I'm perfect. I'm here to argue that I was right to ask questions. Whitmore paused, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. You were warned about representing yourself, but clearly, you came prepared. Jeremiah tilted his head slightly. I didn't have a choice, Your Honor. And that was the truth, wasn't it? Not just about this case, but about everything. Boys like Jeremiah didn't get choices. They didn't get the luxury of error, or the safety net of misunderstanding. Society gave them suspicion by default, and mercy only after they proved themselves saints or geniuses. Not because they were dangerous, but because their brilliance made them dangerous to the lie the system kept telling. Murmurs spread through the gallery like wildfire. But Jeremiah didn't sit down. Your Honor, he said, standing again, voice unwavering. If I may, I'd like to file a formal petition. Whitmore blinked. A petition? Regarding what? Jeremiah stepped forward, holding a neatly typed document. To request a judicial order barring further sale or demolition of the Jefferson Outreach Center until the investigation is complete, and to request the city reevaluate its community redevelopment policies to ensure transparency for all transactions involving historic Black institutions. It was bold, audacious, and realistic, maybe, but it was right. The judge took the paper, read it, looked up. Mr. Wade, he said slowly, you understand this court does not dictate city redevelopment policy. I understand, Jeremiah said, but I also understand that this court has the power to make public recommendations and temporary injunctions. Whitmore's lips twitched just slightly. You've done your homework. Yes, sir. Another pause. The judge glanced around the room, at the city officials in the back, at the reporters scribbling furiously, at the community members who had come to see whether justice was real or just another word people used when they had no power. He tapped his gavel once. Petition will be reviewed. That was it. But it was everything. The next day, Jeremiah made headlines. Teen legal prodigy exposes city scandal. 16-year-old outsmarts courtroom. Jeremiah Wade, the boy who sued the system. He didn't read them. Instead, he returned to the shelter, not to break in this time, but to meet a woman named Ms. Carter, who had once co-managed the shelter with his mother. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, but her voice was still strong. You sound just like her, you know, she said after he explained everything. That same fire, same stubbornness. Jeremiah lowered his gaze. I just want it to mean something. All those years she gave to this place. Can't let it die for nothing. Ms. Carter reached into her purse and handed him a small, worn envelope. She left this for you the day she got her diagnosis. Told me to give it to you when you needed it. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a note written in his mother's careful hand. Don't fight the system because you hate it. Fight it because you know it can be better. Because you know we deserve better. Truth is, baby, you were never meant to fit into their world. You were meant to change it. Tears threatened, but he blinked them back. That evening, he started drafting a new motion, not for court, but for the city council. A proposal to restore the Jefferson Outreach Center as a youth legal aid hub, a place where kids could learn what he learned, not out of desperation, but out of empowerment. He had already proven he could win a case. Now, he wanted to build something that outlasted the verdict. The city council building was colder than the courtroom, not in temperature, but in energy. It was bureaucracy in its purest form, long halls of polished wood, silent elevators, and endless waiting. No gavel here, no jury to sway, just appointed officials and a stopwatch counting every second you spoke. Jeremiah adjusted his tie, one that actually fit this time. A local nonprofit had offered him a few suits after seeing the trial on the news. They wanted him to look the part, but Jeremiah knew the truth. No suit, no haircut, no title would ever protect him like knowledge could. He stepped up to the podium and looked out at the rows of council members, some already glancing down at their phones, others looking bored before he even opened his mouth. But then he spoke, and the room changed. I'm not here to protest, he began, voice calm, steady. I'm not here to disrupt or demand. I'm here because I believe this city forgot something. It forgot that before the Jefferson Outreach Center was just another line in a budget. It was the only home some people ever knew. And when it disappeared, no one asked why. He paused. A few heads lifted. My mother died believing in this city, he continued. She volunteered. She taught. She gave her time. She believed that even broken systems could be repaired. And I'm here today to finish what she started. Jeremiah walked the council through his proposal, point by point, to repurpose the Jefferson Outreach Center as a legal aid and education center for underprivileged youth, to turn the very building they tried to sell into a sanctuary for those the system overlooked. He cited costs, zoning laws, impact studies. He quoted city regulations and even referenced precedents from nearby counties that had passed similar reforms. He wasn't asking for charity. He was making a case. When he finished, the room was quiet, not dismissive, not skeptical, silent. A councilwoman named Rivera leaned forward. Mr. Wade, how old are you again? 16, ma'am. You just outlined a redevelopment and education plan more thorough than anything we've heard in years. He didn't smile. I had a lot of time to study. The vote didn't come that day. Of course it didn't. Governments don't move like courtrooms. They stall. They debate. They weigh optics. But Jeremiah had done something most lobbyists 3 times his age couldn't. He had planted a seed. And more than that, he had left the room believing it could grow. By the end of the week, his name was everywhere again. This time, it wasn't just journalists reaching out. It was students, teachers, young Black kids from other cities, writing to him on social media, sharing their stories, asking for advice. Some wanted to know what books to read. Others wanted help with unfair suspensions, housing issues, police complaints. To the system, they were just case numbers. To Jeremiah, they were a new generation waiting to be heard. He started replying, one by one. Every message, every cry for help. Sometimes just to say, I believe you. Sometimes to send a PDF of a legal resource he'd bookmarked years ago. And sometimes to remind someone not to give up. Meanwhile, back at the courthouse, Judge Whitmore found himself distracted. He'd seen hundreds of trials, thousands of defendants, but something about Jeremiah stayed with him. He rewatched the footage of the hearing, not just to marvel at the boy's command of law, but to study himself. The tone he'd used, the assumptions he'd made, the look in his eyes when he first heard Jeremiah say he'd represent himself. It wasn't just surprise. It had been disbelief, dismissal, and it haunted him. For the first time in years, Whitmore requested to visit a juvenile detention facility, not to sentence anyone, but to listen. He sat in circles with kids who had never seen a courtroom as a place of justice, only punishment. He asked them what they needed, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't talk. He just listened. He didn't tell anyone why, but the staff noticed, and so did the kids. Jeremiah's petition to the council finally made it to the public hearing. This time, the room was packed. Neighbors, organizers, former shelter volunteers, some who remembered his mother, some who had once stayed at Jefferson Outreach themselves. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The Jefferson Outreach Center would not be demolished. It would be restored and renamed the Wade Center for Youth Justice. Jeremiah didn't cry when he heard the vote. He just closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from the strange peace that comes when a fight doesn't end in noise, but in silence that means healing. But the fight wasn't over. If anything, it had only begun. He knew the next part would be harder. Building, teaching, hiring staff, finding funding. He began taking night classes at the community college, legal theory, urban policy, public speaking. The college waived his tuition. They said it was an investment, but Jeremiah didn't do it for titles or credentials. He did it because he had seen the inside of a system most people only read about in textbooks. And he wasn't interested in studying it. He wanted to rewrite it, brick by brick, law by law, life by life. The reopening ceremony of the Wade Center for Youth Justice didn't make national headlines. There were no flashing cameras, no podiums with glossy logos, no celebrities dropping rehearsed words about community investment. But for those who stood on the cracked sidewalk that morning, it was sacred. It was resurrection. The Jefferson Outreach Center had been empty for years. Once filled with laughter and makeshift meals, it had become a husk until Jeremiah came along. Now, its broken windows had been replaced with stained glass art made by local teens. The faded brick walls were cleaned, but not repainted, on purpose. Jeremiah had insisted, let the history show. Inside, the air smelled of new books and fresh paint. Shelves lined the walls, housing everything from civil rights memoirs to juvenile defense manuals. There were quiet rooms for study, a shared tech lab, and a central circle with floor cushions for community meetings. But the most remarkable thing wasn't the space. It was the people walking through its doors. Kids who had once feared the system stepped inside to learn how it worked. Formerly incarcerated teens were now training as peer legal mentors. Single mothers came to study rental laws after years of eviction threats. And at the front desk sat Jeremiah, not behind bulletproof glass, not behind a desk stacked with files, but eye level with everyone who came through the door. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard, he would tell the kids. You just have to know how to speak their language. And I'm gonna teach you. In the corner of the main room hung a single framed photo. His mother, arms wrapped around a younger Jeremiah, both smiling. Underneath, in small black type, were her final written words to him. You were never meant to fit into their world. You were meant to change it. And he was. Every day, more kids came. At first, they were quiet, wary, bruised from a system that had never felt like it belonged to them. Some had been suspended for challenging authority. Others had been profiled at malls, in hallways, on sidewalks. Some didn't speak much at all. But Jeremiah met each of them with the same calm patience he once brought to court. Tell me what happened, he'd say. And they did. Sometimes slowly, sometimes in pieces. But they did. One afternoon, a girl named Diana walked in. She was 12, sharp as a whip, and furious. Her school had expelled her for instigating violence, even though video showed her pushing a boy away after he grabbed her backpack and mocked her braids. They said I overreacted, she spat. But they didn't say nothing to him. Not a single word. Jeremiah didn't try to soften her rage. He just handed her a pen and a copy of the student rights manual. "You don't need to yell, Ayanna," he told her. "You just need to file." She read every word, twice, then wrote a 3-page appeal that made its way all the way to the school board. The expulsion was overturned. When she returned to school, she wore a t-shirt that said, "I know my rights." She didn't say who gave it to her, but everyone knew. Back at the courthouse, Judge Whitmore was no longer the same man who once mocked a boy for daring to stand at the defense table alone. Word had reached him of the Wade Center. He pretended not to care, said things like, "I'm too old for that community stuff," or "Let the city handle the social work." But one Thursday evening, after hours, he pulled into the parking lot and walked through the glass doors. Jeremiah looked up from the reception desk. He didn't seem surprised. "I was wondering when you'd stop pretending not to visit," he said. The judge gave a slight smirk. "I had some questions about these after-school sessions you're running." Jeremiah stood. "They're not just about law. We talk about systems, housing, healthcare, history, stuff they don't teach in textbooks." Whitmore nodded, his eyes scanning the space. "You teach all this on your own?" "No, I just open the door. They do the rest." The judge paused. "You ever think about law school? You've got enough firepower for it." "I will," Jeremiah replied. "But first I want to help kids who'll never get near one." Whitmore walked to the wall where his mother's words were framed. He stared at them for a long time. "Do you think," he said quietly, "it's possible to fix something this broken?" Jeremiah didn't answer right away. He thought of his mother, of Ayanna, of every kid whose voice had been dismissed as trouble, attitude, noise. Then he said, "Not if we keep pretending it was never broken in the first place." The judge turned and looked at him. There was no verdict in his expression, just truth. That evening, Whitmore gave Jeremiah a list. It was handwritten, sloppy. Names of judges, lawyers, and clerks across the city. Ones Whitmore said were worth your time. "They don't all get it," he said, "but some of them are ready to listen." Jeremiah took the list, folded it, and slid it into his pocket. "That's all I've ever asked." That night, the Wade Center stayed open late. Kids sat around the central circle, learning how to write cease and desist letters. Jeremiah didn't stand at the front. He sat with them, shoulder to shoulder, because change doesn't trickle down, it rises. And this was just the beginning. 6 months after the Wade Center opened, something extraordinary happened. A notice arrived from the State Bar Association. Not a summons, not a rejection, but an invitation, formal and embossed, like it belonged on the desk of someone 20 years older. They wanted Jeremiah to speak at the annual Legal Equity Summit. The theme was restoring trust. He laughed quietly at the irony. Trust wasn't something the system gave to boys like him. He had earned it one cross-examination at a time. Still, he accepted. The night before the summit, he sat alone in his room, a single desk lamp casting shadows on a wall cluttered with case files, letters from kids he'd helped, and old sticky notes bearing quotes from legal giants. Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton Houston, Ida B. Wells. But the quote that hung above his desk was his mother's. It always had been. He ran his fingers across the words as if they could still hold her hand. "You were never meant to fit into their world. You were meant to change it." He arrived at the summit dressed in a navy blue suit that still felt too stiff. But his tie was knotted tight, and his head was held higher than ever. The room was packed with attorneys, judges, professors, and students from all across the state. Some had watched his trial. Some had heard rumors. Most didn't know what to expect. The MC introduced him with a tone more curious than respectful. "Our youngest speaker in summit history." But once Jeremiah stepped behind the podium, curiosity faded. 16 months ago, he began, "I stood alone in a courtroom, accused of a crime I didn't commit. And the first thing I heard was laughter. Some people shifted in their seats. Not because I cracked a joke, not because I stumbled, but because I said I'd represent myself. And that was considered laughable." He let that settle. And maybe it should have been. A black teenager with no formal training, no credentials, no pedigree, just books, just pain, just a mother who died believing the law could be used to heal the very wounds it had once inflicted. The audience leaned in. But here's what I've learned since then, he continued. The law doesn't protect you unless you make it. It doesn't bend for your tears. It doesn't move for your grief. It moves when you understand it, when you name its parts, when you break it down, memorize it, and then hand it back to the people who need it the most. He paused, his voice gentling. And those people? They don't sit in this room. They're in school detention cells, in courtrooms with public defenders who've never met them. They're in apartment buildings without leases, living one complaint away from eviction. They're in silence, waiting. Applause began softly, then grew. He finished with a message that would echo beyond the room. I don't want to be the exception. I want to be the blueprint. Because I didn't make the law less complicated, I just made it less distant. After the speech, a dozen attorneys approached him, some eager to mentor, others quietly ashamed. A few asked how they could volunteer at the Wade Center. One law school even offered him early admission. He thanked them all, but his mind stayed on the kids. Back home, Ayanna had started her own student-led justice club in middle school. Two boys Jeremiah had helped with expungement paperwork were now volunteering at a local shelter. The Wade Center had expanded to include weekend workshops on everything from immigration paperwork to labor rights. One morning, a woman arrived with her son. He was 8, shy, held her hand tightly. She said he'd seen Jeremiah on a live stream, wanted to meet him. Why? Jeremiah asked gently. The boy looked up with wide eyes. Because you look like me. That was the moment that stuck with him the most. Not the summit, not the applause, not even the reinstated community programs. It was that 8-year-old boy seeing himself in someone who once stood alone in court and dared to speak louder than the gavel. Later that month, the Wade Center received a grant, enough to hire 3 full-time staff and renovate the second floor. Jeremiah used it to build a small in-house library of legal resources. He named it the Quiet Room, not because people had to be silent inside, but because it was designed for those whose voices were often ignored. Everything was handwritten at first. Labels, directions, rules. But what really caught people's attention was a board mounted near the entrance. On it, in black marker, was a question. What would you change if you knew how? Every kid who came in wrote something. My landlord always yelling. I want my brother home. They suspended me because I was loud. I want to stop them from closing our school. My mom can't read the form. Jeremiah read every one. He kept them in a folder. Not as wishes, as future cases. One night, he was locking up when a city councilman stopped by. The same one who once called his efforts idealistic. This time, he came with a folder in hand and a soft voice. We're drafting a new ordinance to prevent private sale of historical community spaces. Thought maybe you'd want to weigh in. Jeremiah took the folder without a word. Read every page that night. Highlighted, noted, rewrote. By morning, the councilman had a new draft. That was the difference now. They weren't just hearing him. They were listening. By the time Jeremiah turned 17, the Wade Center was no longer just a building. It was a movement. Across the state, whispers had turned into waves. Other cities reached out. Former teachers, civic leaders, even judges, some ashamed of their past rulings, others eager to offer support, sent messages, grants, offers of collaboration. But Jeremiah stayed grounded. He knew how quickly institutions celebrated symbols while ignoring the people behind them. He wasn't a symbol. He was still that boy who once stood alone in court, clutching his mother's handwritten notes like armor. He still woke up with the weight of expectation on his chest. He still heard the echoes of laughter from that courtroom, the sound of disbelief, of assumptions, of the casual cruelty that comes with unchecked power. And yet, now, when he stood in rooms of decision-makers, they listened before speaking. That was progress. Not victory, not justice, but momentum. The Wade Center's programs expanded. They added a new track, restorative justice. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about healing, accountability, reconciliation. One of the most powerful sessions involved two boys from rival neighborhoods. They'd been in and out of juvenile detention. Jeremiah sat them in the quiet room with no guards, no lawyers, just stories. He let them speak, uninterrupted. They didn't trust him at first, but then he told them about his own cousin, Marcus, shot during a misunderstanding between blocks that had never actually hated each other. Just inherited the hate, inherited the war, inherited silence. Sometimes the fight isn't yours, he said. It's passed down. But so is the choice to stop it. That session lasted 5 hours. Neither boy said much at the end. But a week later, they came back, together. Not to fight, to volunteer. Meanwhile, Ayanna, the 12-year-old who once fought her school administration, was now 13 and leading Know Your Rights sessions for kids twice her age. Her voice was strong, her questions sharper than ever. Jeremiah watched her with pride, though he said little. He wasn't one to praise with words. He praised with presence, with investment, with the quiet belief that when people are seen, they grow. But with growth came challenges. One day, a letter arrived, formal, legal, threatening. A real estate developer was suing the city, claiming that the Wade Center violated a clause in the original building deed, that it was still technically a faith-based shelter and not authorized to operate as a legal education center. The lawsuit was thin, but dangerous. It could shut them down for months. For a moment, it all came rushing back. The fear, the bureaucracy, the way power played chess while communities scrambled just to hold on to a single pawn. But Jeremiah didn't panic. He prepared. Within 48 hours, he had drafted a legal rebuttal, citing historical preservation exemptions, federal education statutes, and a host of community testimonies. More than that, he mobilized. At the next city council hearing, over 200 community members showed up. Grandmothers, students, teachers, former shelter clients. They didn't come to plead. They came to testify. One by one, they took the microphone. This place saved my son. My daughter learned how to fight eviction here. I never knew the law could speak for people like me until I came here. This building was always a sanctuary. Now, it's finally ours. The lawsuit collapsed under the weight of truth. But more importantly, the city council passed a unanimous vote. The Wade Center would be permanently protected as a historical landmark and community legal education institution. When Jeremiah stepped outside that night, the sky was wide open, painted with stars and the soft hum of city life below. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, not vindication, but peace. That same evening, he visited his mother's grave for the first time in over a year. Not because he had forgotten, but because he finally had something to say that felt worthy. He knelt quietly, the wind brushing his face like the ghost of a lullaby. "I'm doing it, Mama," he whispered. "Not because I'm strong, but because you were." He placed a photo on her headstone of the new Wade Center sign, lit up at dusk, with a group of kids standing beneath it. Kids who smiled like they believed in the future again. He stayed there until the breeze turned cold. When he returned to the center, he found a small envelope waiting for him. No name, just a quote written on the outside. "Justice begins in the places where silence used to live." Inside was a single check, a donation. No strings attached. Enough to fund 3 more years of operation. Enough to hire more staff. Enough to start dreaming bigger. Attached was a note in shaky handwriting. "I once mocked a boy who thought he could represent himself. I was wrong. Keep going. GW." Jeremiah didn't need to ask who sent it. He just folded the note and placed it beside his mother's letter. Then he opened a new notebook and began outlining a proposal. Traveling justice workshops to reach schools that didn't have access to the center. Mobile legal libraries. Online resources translated into every language spoken in the city. Because justice, he believed, should never be stationary. It should meet people where they stand, even if where they stood was alone. The mobile justice workshops began not with headlines, but with a borrowed van and folding chairs. Jeremiah, Ayanna, and two newly trained youth mentors, Jordan and Celeste, drove through the neighborhoods most often forgotten, most often over-policed, most often labeled problem zones. These were the zip codes where rights were violated before kids could spell appeal, where the courthouse was a rumor and jail a rite of passage. But they didn't come to talk down. They came to listen. In playgrounds where swings had rusted into stillness, they drew chalk outlines of courtrooms and taught kids how to object. In laundromats, while mothers folded uniforms for jobs they'd never be promoted in, Jeremiah handed out eviction defense guides and translated lease terms into plain English. In parking lots outside churches, where sermons gave hope but not protection, they played recordings of traffic stop scripts. What to say, what not to say, how to record, how to report. It wasn't revolutionary in size. It was revolutionary in spirit. Word spread. Slowly at first. A whisper here, a post there. But soon enough, people were showing up before the van even parked. Not just for information, but for affirmation. For someone to say, yes, what happened to you was wrong, and no, you're not crazy. And it wasn't just kids anymore. It was janitors trying to understand their rights after being fired without notice. Immigrant families afraid to sign government forms. A pregnant woman who had been misdiagnosed in an underfunded clinic and wanted to know if she could sue. Jeremiah never claimed to have all the answers, but he had something just as powerful: the willingness to find them with you, not for you. At the end of each session, he asked a question. Would you wish someone had told you earlier? The answers varied. Not to sign that paper, that my voice mattered, that I wasn't crazy for asking questions, that surviving isn't the same as living, that it's okay to want more. He wrote them down, all of them. He said they were future curricula in disguise. But not everyone welcomed the movement. A local politician, Councilman Brecker, called the workshops street law gimmicks. He claimed they incited suspicion against law enforcement, that they were performative activism masking as reform. Jeremiah didn't flinch. He invited Brecker to a session. Brecker didn't show, but 37 community members did. One of them, an elderly woman named Ms. Geraldine, stood and spoke. They always say young people don't care, but this boy here, he taught me more in 1 hour than the city's done in 50 years. The next morning, Brecker's office received a petition with over 8,000 signatures, demanding the Wade Center's programs be integrated into public school life skills curricula. They ignored it. So Jeremiah created a free online course instead. No paywall, no ads, no usernames. Just a clean, accessible, mobile-first program called Your Rights, Your Power. By the end of the first month, it had been downloaded over 150,000 times, and that number kept climbing. Meanwhile, inside the Wade Center, something unexpected began happening. People started leaving things behind, not by accident, but as tribute. One girl left a red ribbon with "I survived" scrawled on it. A boy left a sketch of his family's apartment. A mother left her son's broken ankle monitor. A teacher left attention slips that had targeted students for talking too much. Even Ms. Carter, Jeremiah's mother's old friend, left a pair of worn work gloves she'd used during food drives. The items were hung carefully on a wall now known as the Archive of the Unheard. Every piece carried a story that the system had once ignored. Together, they became history, not the kind that lived in museums, but the kind that demanded to be reckoned with. On the anniversary of the original court case, exactly 2 years since Judge Whitmore asked Jeremiah where his lawyer was, the courthouse sent an official invitation. In recognition of your contributions to justice and community, the court requests your presence for a formal acknowledgement. Jeremiah considered declining. He didn't do this for awards. He didn't do this to be accepted by the same system that once laughed at him. But something told him to go. Not for himself, but for every kid still waiting in holding cells. The courtroom hadn't changed much. Same creaky benches. Same echo when someone shuffled too loudly. Same seal above the bench, declaring equal justice under law. But this time, Jeremiah didn't walk in as a defendant. He walked in as an architect of justice. The gallery was full. Teachers, mentors, reporters, even kids from the Wade Center who had never seen a courtroom except on television. They watched, wide-eyed, as Jeremiah stepped forward and stood at the very spot where he once defended himself with nothing but a folded piece of paper and grief. Judge Whitmore, now semi-retired but still respected, stepped out from chambers in full robe. He looked at Jeremiah not with pity, not with pride, but with a quiet reverence. 2 years ago, the judge said slowly, I doubted you. Worse than that, I dismissed you. Today, I acknowledge that mistake, and I acknowledge the world you are building. There was no applause, not because people weren't moved, but because silence in that moment said more than clapping ever could. When Jeremiah finally spoke, his voice didn't shake. I didn't come to be celebrated, he said. I came so you'd never forget what you almost silenced. Then he turned and walked out. The courtroom didn't stop him. The world was waiting outside, and he had more work to do. News of Jeremiah's return to the courtroom traveled faster than he expected. Not because he had delivered some grand speech or accepted a polished award, but because he had declined to be defined by either. That was what struck people most. He could have smiled for the cameras, shaken hands with judges, signed book deals, but he didn't. He walked out. That clip of him turning his back to the bench was viewed over 2 million times in 3 days. Captioned and recaptioned. Power without permission. A courtroom cannot contain justice. He changed the system, then left the room. But Jeremiah didn't pay attention to any of that. Because that evening, back at the Wade Center, Ayanna pulled him aside. She was different now, older, more focused, but still fire-mouthed and fearless. You're not sleeping, she said bluntly. Jeremiah didn't deny it. She looked at him, eyes narrowing. You're burning too fast. You think you have to fix everything yourself. He sighed, rubbing the space between his eyes. Every time I close one door, 2 more break open. And maybe that's how it's supposed to be, she replied. But you can't be the hammer and the architect. Tick 1. He didn't answer. Not because she was wrong, but because he knew she was right. The next day, he gathered the youth mentors in the quiet room. Jordan, Celeste, Ayanna, and 5 new interns from the latest training cohort. Some had lived in shelters. Some had been arrested. One had nearly been deported. But all of them had made it through. Jeremiah looked at them, not as students, but as equals. It's time you take the wheel, he said. There was a long pause. Then Jordan grinned. About time. Jeremiah stepped back. He wasn't leaving, not fully, but he was shifting from leader to builder, from front lines to infrastructure, because a movement couldn't revolve around one voice. It had to sing in harmony. He focused on strategy now, policy proposals, grant writing, cross-state alliances. He spoke with school boards about making legal literacy a standard subject, met with city planners to codify the preservation of Black historical sites, helped draft a proposal for statewide juvenile justice reform. He didn't speak on every panel. He didn't sit in every room. Instead, he sent Ayanna, sent Celeste, sent the next wave, armed with books, memory, and voices sharpened not by anger alone, but by clarity. And yet, even as momentum grew, Jeremiah carried a quiet ache. Because leadership, especially Black leadership, especially young Black leadership, came with invisible wounds. He missed his mother most on the quiet days. The days when no meetings were scheduled, no papers filed, just silence. The kind of silence that reminded him of everything he had lost to get here. One night, alone in the archive room, he picked up the folder that held every handwritten answer to his question. What do you wish someone had told you earlier? He read them slowly, not to fix anything, but to remember why he started. Then his phone buzzed. An email. Subject: Congressional Youth Forum on Systemic Reform. Location: Washington, D.C. Panel request: Jeremiah Wade, founder, Wade Center for Youth Justice. He stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The same government that once tried to bury him with bureaucracy now wanted him to teach them how to heal it. He forwarded the email to Ayanna with one line. "Ready to pack a bag?" She responded instantly, already zipping it. In D.C., the room was lined with powerful people in suits too clean to trust. Jeremiah wore the same blue suit he wore when he first stood at the bar of justice. He hadn't tailored it. He hadn't needed to. He had grown into it. The panel moderator, an older congressman with polished rhetoric and polite detachment, leaned forward. "Mr. Wade, if you could change one federal law tomorrow, what would it be?" Jeremiah didn't hesitate. "I'd require every public school to teach students not just their rights, but the language of the law. Not just the what, but the how, because power is only dangerous when it isn't shared." The room was silent. Then came the question he expected. How do we know these programs won't create more defiance? More confrontation? Jeremiah's voice was even. They will, and they should, but not violent confrontation. Informed confrontation. Because systems don't collapse under riots. They collapse under scrutiny. They collapse when a teenager walks into a courtroom and makes the judge stutter. He looked out over the sea of faces, some nodding, some tightening. "Your fear," he continued, "is not of chaos. It's of clarity." Later that night, in the hotel room overlooking the Capitol, Ayanna stood at the window. "You think anything we said got through to them?" Jeremiah shrugged. "Maybe not all of them. Maybe not most of them. But one?" He looked at her. "That's how all of this started." She nodded. And then, for the first time in a long time, he slept. Deeply, because for once, the fight didn't feel like drowning. It felt like breathing. A year after the Wade Center's mobile workshops began, a mural was painted across the east wall of the building. It wasn't Jeremiah's idea. The youth mentors planned it in secret. The artwork stretched nearly 40 feet wide, brilliant with deep reds, blues, and the warm, grounding tones of home. It showed a courtroom, but not the way most saw it. In the center sat a young boy, not in handcuffs, but in a suit, not behind a defendant's desk, but standing before it, hands raised, not in surrender, but in command. Behind him stood the faces of community, teachers, grandmothers, bus drivers, kids, and above them, a quote written in graceful, handwritten script. "You were never meant to fit into their world. You were meant to change it." Jeremiah stood in front of the mural for a long time the day it was unveiled. He didn't say much, just ran his fingers along the edge of the paint, as if reaching into the past and the future at once. That evening, the Wade Center held its first annual Legacy Night. No suits, no ceremony, just stories. Families gathered in the courtyard. Youth mentors took turns reading from journals, letters, and case files. Stories of kids who came in broken and walked out brave. Then came Ayanna's turn. She stood on a small wooden crate and held up a faded piece of paper. "This," she said, "is the original petition Jeremiah filed when they tried to demolish this place. And this," she held up a second, "is the list of over 1,000 kids helped here since then. That's not paperwork. That's proof." The crowd cheered, but Jeremiah didn't raise his hands or bow. Instead, he stood in the back, head low, heart full. Because legacy, he knew, wasn't what people said about you when you were in the room. It was what they did when you weren't. 2 weeks later, Jeremiah returned to the very courthouse where it had all begun. This time, not to argue, not to fight, not even to speak. He had been asked to attend the swearing-in of a new group of public defenders. He almost said no, but when he saw the names on the list of inductees, he changed his mind. One of them was Celeste. She had passed the bar. As he watched her raise her hand and take the oath, he felt something quietly profound settle in his chest. She wasn't just following in his footsteps. She was building her own. After the ceremony, Celeste found him outside, under the large oak tree that stood just beyond the courthouse steps. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. Jeremiah shrugged. "Didn't think I needed to." "You didn't," she smiled. But I'm glad you did. There was a long pause. Then she added, "You gave me the language, Jeremiah. I just gave it roots." He nodded softly. "That's the whole point." Before they parted, Celeste handed him a small box. Inside was a tie, navy blue, the same color as the first suit he wore to court. "But this one's tailored," she said with a wink. Back at the Wade Center, a boy waited on the front steps. He was young, maybe 11, holding a backpack with one broken zipper and a folder full of handouts. When Jeremiah approached, the boy stood. "You the guy who helps people not get in trouble?" he asked. Jeremiah crouched so they were eye to eye. "Something like that." The boy hesitated. "I think they're trying to suspend me. My teacher said I talk too much." Jeremiah smiled. "I used to hear that too." The boy looked nervous. "Is that bad?" "No," Jeremiah said. "It just means your voice is strong. We'll teach you how to use it." He opened the door, letting the boy step inside. And in that simple gesture, one door, one child, one moment, everything came full circle. That night, Jeremiah returned to his mother's gravesite. The stars above were scattered like ancient witnesses. He knelt down, placed a small flower at the base of the stone, and whispered, "They listened, Mama. I made them listen." He sat there quietly, not to mourn, but to rest. Because for once, justice didn't feel like a war. It felt like a homecoming.